What's up, everyone? So, I decided to do this president's thing before break, which was to list the presidents of what I think order they should be in. But then I saw the YouTube video that I showed you, and I thought, nah, I think I'm going to just try it this way, where I label them A, B, C, D, F, and U. Except I thought it would be kind of cool to incorporate other teachers in here. So, what I'm really going to do is going to do a three-parter. First part is going to look at the first 14 presidents, and I'm going to rank them based off of that, out of just that 14, and then the next 14, and then the next 14 up to President Clinton. Just because I feel like Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden is still too recent, even though Bush has been already a long time ago. I feel like it's a good even split 14, 14, 14. So it took me a long time to set this thing up because I'm using a different microphone. I don't even know if it's going to come out good, but we're going to do it. And so if I'm talking low, it's because I can hear myself really loud in here. So we're going to go with it. And before I get started with the president's list, again, the first 14, remember that when we're looking at this stuff, I'm looking at the presidents from I'm looking at the presidents not from the present eyes. In other words, when I rank them, I'm ranking them based off of the time that they were in. And I feel like that's the only way to do it because, of course, I'm going to look at every single president and I'm going to say, they did this and they did that. And so, with that, I'm going to look at just their presidency, not their personal life. I'm not going to look at the before and the after. I may mention something about their before and after, but I'm not going to talk about, I want to talk about their presidency as is, but also with their presidency also comes their administration. So I'm also going to talk about the administration, and then I'm going to try to weigh the positives and negatives in my judging. Now, at the end of these three, I want to do like a question and answer thing for other teachers, other history teachers. And so I think it'd be kind of cool. And we'll do, I don't know if we'll do a live one or if we'll just do something where we record it, but I really want to get their insight on this as well. I should also preface this with I am not an expert in presidential history. I have taught AP US history, I've taught dual enrollment US history, and that's why I can talk about a lot of these presidents more than a lot of other US history teachers at our school. But that doesn't make me an expert. It just means that I've mentioned them. And probably what I mentioned in class is probably the only thing I know about them. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to eventually learn who they are. I want to buy a bunch of books that are on every president, but just know that going in. So I'm no expert, and so I'm doing this based off of what I think, based off of what I know. So without further ado, here we go. I have them all already listed up here on this little tier list thing, so I'm going to just go in a row and rank them, starting with old George. Now, George is obviously going to get an A, and I say obviously because, again, looking at the negatives, he did own slaves. Most of them were Martha's, but he did have a lot of slaves on his own accord, and he actually went hunting for one of them. But I'm going to look at his presidency, and of course, anybody that's the first is going to set precedents. And so, because he set those precedents, he deserves to be on top because he's the one that he left after 8 years. That's something you don't do when you're a leader or when you're a leader. A lot of people didn't voluntarily leave; they either died or they were forced out. So, in a new country, this guy sets the precedent. I mean, he builds a cabinet that's not built in the Constitution, and he does this knowing that he can get different opinions from different people. Case in point, Hamilton and Jefferson, starting the first, political parties and whatnot. I think one of the other big incidents in his presidency is the Whiskey Rebellion, where he puts it down with federal troops, kind of showcasing that, yes, the states have their rights, but the federal government is here because if you don't have the federal government kind of squashing these little minor rebellions, then you have chaos. And that's kind of what he used as a precedent to say, no, this is the federal government. One of the other incidents in his administration that I can think of is Jay's Treaty. And the Jay's Treaty was kind of like this negotiation with Britain, kind of getting us closer ties or trying to get closer ties with Britain. Of course, he was condemned by his opponents, but at the same time, I think a lot of what he had to do was figure stuff out because how do you start a new country? and the fact that he did it with such grace and was able to leave back to his farm at the end of it, I think that makes him pretty material. From next up is John Adams. He is very D material. Again, I'm not going to talk about his, and maybe I'm too harsh on John Adams. Again, this is all a bias, so of course, if you have issues with it, good. I'm glad. I hope it elicits discussion. But John Adams, I give a D because he was a great diplomat, and I don't want to take that away from him. He was a great founding father, but as president, the Alien and Sedition Acts, it still does it for me. I mean, anytime you're supposed to be the leader of the people, a chief citizen, and you say that they can't talk against you or speak their mind, it's a little rough. And so I think most of his presidency, he's trying to live up to old George, and I think that kind of ruins his mindset, ruins his presidency. He's too strict, too austere. Like he wasn't, um, he's very erudite, meaning very educated. So he was very pretentious. So people didn't like him to begin with. And I think the quasi war, the war with France, the undeclared war with France, where he doesn't handle it during his presidency. I mean, it goes on and on and on, and he just kind of like, oh no, I'm going to be neutral, like Washington. And I feel like that's very D material. Jefferson, we're going to put him at a B. Again, this is during his presidency. I think one of the things that people were clamoring for was new land at that time, and so that's kind of one of the reasons why I put him at a B, is because people were in the mindset of expansion, and so he followed that. Now, questionable, was it constitutional? No, but he was able to do it, and people were the happier for it. I think another thing that I don't know, that I like about him is that he was able to change his mind. Like, of course, he was an adamant. I don't think I used that word right. He was very Democratic Republican or anti-federalist at the time, and he went against Hamilton in pretty much everything, and yet used a lot of federalist policies during his presidency. I think that shows that he knew it was working, and so he was going to maintain it, and so that's why he did it. And I think that shows courage to be able to admit when you're wrong. Now, did he publicly apologize? No, but I think it's kind of cool that he maintained those policies. You can call him a hypocrite too, of course, but I think in general he did what was best for the people. What he did not do best for the people, which is why he's at a B and maybe could be relinquished to a C, is the Embargo Act. When he did that in his second term and the issues with Britain and British impressment, he decided to say, no, we're not going to trade with any country in the world. And that hurt, of course, his own farmers. So obviously that was dumb. But then eventually Madison will come in and do Macon's Bill number 2. Speaking of Madison, we are giving him a C. I go back and forth on this one. Sometimes I even wonder why I gave him a C. But I don't know if he's really B. I don't know if he's really C. I mean, yes, he's the father of the Bill of Rights, father of the Constitution. But again, that was before his presidency. During his presidency, he does the Macon's Bill, try to reverse Thomas Jefferson's stuff. But I think he was kind of like a Adams to Washington. Like he was very much trying to follow Jefferson's footsteps. He did in a lot of ways, especially with in regards to Native American policy. He was very paternalistic towards the natives and saying that privately he was saying they could never be civilized, but publicly he was saying oh, we need to just show them the way kind of thing. They'll do it and they'll show them the way. His leadership during the War of 1812, I mean, allowing them to get so far into the capital, I guess militarily, I think that's kind of weak. An incident during his time after General Wilkinson, the guy that was part of the Burr conspiracy and trying to have a treasonous plot with France. I think it's France or Spain, one of them, against them. Wilkinson's still around in the army, and Madison kind of defends him all the time until finally Madison has to give up and be like, okay, you're out of the army. But it takes a while, so that incompetence, I guess, in dealing with your own generals. And then he cut the military in general. So you've got Washington, Adams, and Jefferson kind of maintaining that military. I mean, Jefferson was great in the Tripoli War, or at least, trying to utilize the military, whereas Madison cut that. I think the lasting thing of Madison was one of his first Bill of Rights, or one of his Bill of Rights, was to not give Congress pay raise. The Congress couldn't make their own pay raises, and it didn't pass in the Bill of Rights. It's actually now our 27th Amendment, the last amendment that was done under President Clinton's administration. And his administration, of course, is the one that gave him themselves pay raises. Sorry, not his administration, the Congress. Again, not really his fault, but still. So that's why I give him a C. Let's go with James Monroe. And this is probably wrong. I'm probably whatever. I mean, yes, James Monroe presided over the era of good feelings, which weren't that great of feelings. I mean, there was a panic in 1819. So, I mean, kind of how he handled that wasn't very, I don't know, wasn't the best, but it wasn't a prolonged panic. So, I guess maybe that's why it was a good thing that what he did, because he was focused on internal improvements. Um, he made some treaties with Britain and Russia over the land in the Pacific Northwest, getting us more land, acquired Florida. Under Monroe in his second term, he had the Monroe Doctrine. Now, he didn't write it, obviously. John Quincy Adams did, but I mean, it was something that was, it's not the sense that, like, oh, yes, now we're going to be paternalistic to our sister nations in South America. It was really more, I think, again, biased opinion, I think it was very much a symbol of identity, kind of showcasing that, like, hey, we're a young country, but we're here and we're powerful, and we want to make sure that Europe doesn't look at us as like somebody that's easy to take over. He was a part of the American Colonization Society, where he tried to remove a lot of the slaves into back to Africa. To That's why the capital of Liberia is Monrovia. Now, again, whether that's a benevolent thing or not, um, much like Abraham Lincoln, he was very much against blacks and whites being together. But he thought, well, maybe this was the way. Maybe this is a way for them to make it in life, because he said they're not going to make it in the United States. So why not go over there? Again, we look at that as bad now, but I think at the time that was something that was like, okay, well, we don't have to beat them. We don't have to be cruel to them. We could just send them over to Africa, which again would be cruel. But I think in his mindset, he was trying to handle the issue of slavery because it was ever growing. Speaking of slavery, there was the Missouri Compromise during his presidency. Now, I tell a lot of students that the Missouri Compromise is kind of like a precursor to the Civil War, because it was just a band aid over slavery. But at least he was actually the first one to mention it in public, because his predecessors, didn't really do much to help or hinder slavery. I mean, the Three-Fifths Compromise, I guess you could say, but again, he was actually recognizing that slavery was an issue, or at least in there, he himself had slaves. So he was recognizing it as an issue and tried to. Mostly, it was Henry Clay that did the compromise, but under his administration, he was a part of making it go through. So I give him an A for at least effort for trying that, at least that social aspect of it. John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, I gave him a little bit above his father. And I don't even know why. Because I mean, under his administration, he started off rough with the corrupt bargain. It was shady politics, right? And the other big thing was the tariff of abominations. Pretty big deal, especially because it wasn't even supposed to pass. Like, even the people that were against him were like, "Oh, it's not going to pass." It's just so wild. The fact that he approved it, or that he was okay with it, is a little much. Like, meaning that you're kind of incompetent, that you don't understand what this is going to do. And it led to the nullification crisis, which almost led to a civil war. So it's kind of I mean, I really feel like he should be D, actually. I'm gonna make an executive decision. I'm gonna put him with his father. He's a D. We'll go with Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson. What did I have? C or B? I had him as C. Yes. Uh, I think one of the things that's positive for him is he's the people's president. I mean, you have mass democracy coming in, a lot of people voting because they feel like they have somebody that represents them. You got rid of the national debt, which at the time was pretty cool, until he decided to mess up the banking system and have these pet banks, which eventually will ruin the economy. And that kind of brings him back down from an A. You've got the nullification crisis going on during his time. Him initiating the force bill was very Washington esque, meaning that the federal government is the one that's in charge. So, let's push it down. The native policy, of course. Now, the Trail of Tears was essentially initiated by him. It didn't actually happen until Van Buren's presidency, but he was very, one of the things I read about him and the Indian policy was that he felt like they weren't going to be able to be civilized. Now, obviously, the Cherokee proved him wrong because they were able to stand up for themselves and actually win a court case. But the problem is I think he felt like there was always going to be conflict. Now, again, present eyes, of course, it's going to be cruel, right? I mean, it was cruel no matter what. But I think in his mindset, as well as the people around him during that time, they were more of like, look, there's always going to be conflict. What if we just put him to this other land? Now, of course, in hindsight, we know that they keep pushing people into different lands. But I think for the time, I think it was kind of his way of dealing with the natives without actually just going and massacring them all, like as far as a forced thing. However, we look at it today as kind of a genocidal kind of thing because it was pinpointing those Native Americans. So that's one of the reasons why, he's obviously brought back to a sea. The treaties with several nations kind of bring him back up, from a D into the C range. I just think that during the time, I mean, he had probably a good approval rating during that time, and maybe I'm wrong. I thought I looked at him having a good approval rating, but the fact is that he was the people's president, and I think that's something to look at and be able to focus on too. Van Buren, the Little Magician, is going to be an F, mostly because the Trail of Tears is enacted in this. He mishandles the Panic of 1837. I never usually try to judge a president on economics because the economics are going to do what the world does, or at least what the country does. But in a lot of the things that he did with the Panic of 1837, it's almost like he didn't know what to do, which nobody does usually. And I don't know what I would have done either, but I don't think he was very vocal about it. So, and then there was also the case in the Amistad case, the famous Amistad ship, where he demanded for, I believe it was Britain, to bring back the slaves, even though, like, the slave trade had ended all times ago. The people were trying to escape, and then he's like demanding them back and whatnot. So just, you know, little things like that, and then, well, little things, big things like that, I meant. And the Panic of 1837 really sold it for me that he should be just kind of in the F range. William Henry Harrison, we're going to put him in the unknown because he was only around for a month. Apparently, he only had one cabinet, or no, he had a couple within that month, I guess. He had meetings. I don't know. I read something about John Tyler's presidency, and it was something about he had meetings during his presidency. But either way, there's really not much to go off because he died a month later. So we got his successor, John Tyler, which will also give an F. I have it down here. Mostly because he was almost impeached, or at least headed that way, because he was constantly vetoing. Before him, presidents didn't really use the veto exponentially. He did. And I think, especially when his own party is kind of having second thoughts about him and people have a lack of faith in him, that doesn't do good for the American public, that doesn't do good for the American people. He had clashes with his own party. So, I mean, if you can't even handle your own stuff, you're not going to handle the country. Polk's actually going to get a high ranking just because, and, you know, the issues with Mexico is one of the big downfalls of him and probably should make him down to a C. But the fact is when you look at a president, what do you look for in success? And when you get a president that comes in and says the things that he wants to do and he actually does them, that's something that you got to take note of, because he wanted Oregon, he wanted the tariffs, to reduce the tariffs, he wanted to reestablish the treasury system, he wanted California, he got all of that. So and he even said, I'm going to do this in 4 years. How many presidents can we get to do that in 4 years? A lot of them, it takes 8 to even get things changed, just for some other president to come in and change it all again. So I have to give him that. I mean, he heard the people, and he did what he said he was going to do. Now, again, people go back and forth with the Mexican American War. Yes, it was very aggressive policies, especially with the way that he initiated the Mexican American War. again, if you were at that time, you'd probably be supporting him, depending on where you are in the region. Obviously there's going to be opposition to him too because party system. But I got to go with him doing what he said he was going to do, and then he left office. Coming in after him is Zachary Taylor, who's going to get a D. Just, I mean, one of the positives at the time was the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, where you actually get a canal going in, and some treaties with Britain. But other than that, he was trying to set in motion the Compromise of 1850, which was to annex California, and he had everything going for him. The gold rush, he had everything that was like, yeah, everybody wants to do this, and then he died. Some people say it was this is conspiracy status, but some people say it was poisoning by his opponents. But a lot of the other cabinet members fell ill too because he ate a bunch of raw food like cherries, like without washing them, I guess, whatever. And so he was poisoned on that. But there's really not much more to know off of him because he dies during the Compromise of 1850 battle, and that's where we get Millard Fillmore, who will come in as a C because he's the one that actually oversees the compromise. He's worried about the national infrastructure, which is something that a lot of the presidents kind of forgot during this time. I shouldn't say forgot, but I mean, like Jefferson's treasurer was all about it. The guy that was leading the behind the scenes with all these presidents, which Henry Clay, who's worried about the infrastructure. But I think this president, Millard Fillmore, is like actually wanting to do something. He's got a lot of diversity in some of the appointments that he gets. In fact, he's in contact and becomes best friends with Dorothea Dix, the one that tried to get prison reform and asylum reform. Unfortunately, a lot of her stuff fell on deaf ears, but her and him really tried to work towards something. Um, so he was okay in trying to appoint certain people that were different than him. His other downfall, though, is the Dred Scott case that came about in there, or not Dred Scott case. I'm sorry. Was it the Dred Scott? No, because that was in '57. Um, the Perry exploration, where he's like looking out for China, Japan, trying to see over in Asia, trying to get more. He's trying to do it through trade and not aggression. So, I mean, he's trying to see have Commodore Matthew Perry go out and explore in there. So that's where I think he goes to see. And then lastly, Franklin Pierce will get an F. Kind of the 1850s people are really hard to get anything above F just because of their stance on slavery and stance on trying to solve the issue because the Compromise of 1850 still did not solve it. And that's why Fillmore comes down to a C. But Franklin Pierce comes in there and, well, first I'm going to tell you why he gets an F. And flat out, it's the Kansas Nebraska Act because I feel like that's the starting of the Civil War. I mean, the fact that all these other, John Brown being able to go and slaughter those people, and you just have like this huge debate in Congress that leads to fighting. I mean, Preston Brooks beating the hell out of Charles Sumner. You've got all this tense and animosity, and you're going to go ahead and approve of this act going in of popular sovereignty to see who's going to be slave, who's going to be free. It's it's an issue, and I think that's in itself should be an F. I do have to say that like I don't know what I would have done in his position. I don't think he would have been able to fully. I don't think he would have changed even with the Kansas Nebraska Act, only because right before he was elected president, and in January, so remember they come in March. In January, him and his wife and his little son, his only son, go on a train ride to and they're on this train ride and it gets off the tracks and it wrecks, and both of them see their son crushed by the train. I mean, I don't know how I would have been able to become president at that time. I think I would have resigned, especially because you're going to be in the public eye. So I'm not going to say that that's an excuse, that that's why he like just didn't care. But at the same time, like, what else do you do in there? And so that's why I think Franklin Pierce, I don't think he was ever going to get higher than an F anyway, for that because of the way that everything was going. So I think I took longer than I wanted to, but I think it's because I tried to explain a little bit of why I did these things. So I'm going to do a part two later on and a part three, and then hopefully we'll have a Q&A to see, have people question me, and maybe I might change my mind. It depends on what I know, or what I learn from that. But that's based off of what I know of them. And so I'm hoping that there's a lot of disagreements with that, because maybe I might change my mind.